Good morning. If you would, open your Bibles to the book of Galatians chapter 5. That's where we'll be beginning this morning, Galatians chapter 5. Good to see such a wonderful crowd out this morning. Got several people that we've hadn't had in a while due to sickness and otherwise, and it's good to have them back. People that's been traveling, good to have them back. Good to have my good friend John Craig and his family here with us this morning. If you haven't got a chance to meet John and his family, do so. He's one of the best men I know. I've known him since we were probably freshmen in college, or maybe even before that. But I'm glad to have them here with us. Good to have everybody with us. John had texted me Friday, or called me Friday, and told me they was going to try to come. I've been excited to see him. Hadn't seen him since, I guess, when we was in Denver. Might have been the last time I'd seen each other. And it made me think about what David said in Psalms chapter 122 and verse 1. He said, I'm glad when they said, let us go to the house of the Lord. That's the way I felt this morning. It's good to see everybody because I've been preparing for this lesson here for a long time, and I don't want to take full credit for it. It came from a conversation me and Don had about some different things that go on in life. And, when we look at the Scriptures, we can see patience being listed as one of the fruits of the Spirit. In Galatians chapter 5 and verse 22, Paul talks about that. He says, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there is no law. Patience can be tough. It's tough on this old boy. And especially in the day and age that we live in where things are instantaneous, right? A microwave mill ain't even fast enough anymore. My truck ain't fast enough. My motorcycle ain't fast enough. Planting season can't get over soon enough, can it, Drago? We expect things here, now. But what if you had to wait? What if you needed to wait? Have you ever tried or needed to make a purchase on something, whether it's a house or a car or, and you use the expression, I need to sleep on it. Sometimes we don't get that luxury, but, it's always better in my experience to be able to sleep on it because you might have a different realization the next morning once it's come and done. But what if you not just sleeping on it, what if you waited 3 days? What if you waited 3 days? Would your outlook change? Would the decision that you were going to make on day 1 be different than what you would have made on day 3? Would your purpose change? Would be what you were committed to be doing, whatever task that might be, whatever thing it might be, would your purpose change from day 1 to day 3? Because a lot can change in just 3 days. That's what we're going to talk about this morning, is that concept of how that if you wait 3 days, if you look at the revelation of things that have happened in the Scriptures of what took place in the span of 3 days, and it was interesting when I began this study of how things change, of how often you see this trend of 3 days. Now we know about Jesus raising from the grave, and we'll talk about that of 3 days. But there's lots of things that happen in the Bible that in 3 days things change. I think, when I originally, when you think about 3 days, one of the first ones that I thought of was Jonah. In Jonah chapter 1, turn there with me if you would. Jonah chapter 1 and verse 1. And it says, and I'll be reading from the New American Standard Version this morning. It says, the word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, arise, go to Nineveh, the great city, and cry against me, for their wickedness has come up before me. But Jonah rose up to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. So he went down to Joppa, found a ship that was going to Tarshish, paid the fare, and went down into it to go with him to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. The Lord hurled a great wind on the sea, and there was a great storm on the sea, so that the ship was about to break up. But when the sailors became afraid, and every man cried to his God, and they threw the cargo which were in the ship into the sea to lighten it for them. But Jonah had gone below into the hold of the ship. If we go on to verse 14, things are getting worse. Verse 13 says, however, the men rowed desperately to return to land, and they could not, for the sea had become even stormier against them. Then they called on the Lord and said, "We earnestly pray, O Lord, do not let us perish on the account of this man's life, and do not let innocent blood on us, for you, O Lord, have done as it pleased." So they picked up Jonah, threw him into the sea, and the sea stopped its raging. Then the men feared the Lord greatly, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows. And the Lord appointed a great fish to swallow Jonah. And Jonah was in the stomach of the fish there 3 days and 3 nights. Jonah does the opposite of what God called him to do. He says, "Hey, I want you to go to Nineveh." He says, I'm out. I'm going to Tarshish. I don't want to do that. Well, it didn't matter what he wanted to do. God had his way in the end anyways. And to deliver these other men from being killed by this sinking ship, they toss him overboard. They realize he's the problem. God, through his providence, he could have just said, "Well, Jonah, you disobeyed me in the first place. You're going to drown because of it. You're done for." God, because of his mercy, allows a fish to swallow him. Now, I know in that picture is a whale, and that's what most people say there was a whale. I don't know. All I know is it says fish. But a whale's a pretty big fish. It could stand to reason it could be. But he gets swallowed up by this fish, and it says that he was in the stomach of it for 3 days and 3 nights. Now, I've never been in the belly of a whale. Hope I don't ever end up in the belly of a fish. But I would assume, with no cell phone, no light, nothing to eat, no newspaper, no book of any kind, that you're going to have a lot of time for some self-reflecting. Right, Ellis? A bunch of time. And we see in Jonah chapter 1 and verse 2 that while he's in there, he's praying. It says, Jonah chapter 2 and verse 1, it says, "Jonah prayed to the Lord his God from the stomach of the fish, and he said, I called out to my distress to the Lord, and he answered me. I cried for help from the depth of Sheol. You heard my voice." God heard him. And we see eventually that God delivers him. But in those 3 days that he was there, he took time to reflect. Now, I always try to, in any type of when I read anything in the Scriptures, y'all know to try to apply it to myself. Do you ever take time to reflect about what you've done in the past, what you're going to do? We can get so busy with what we're doing that we don't take the time to reflect on what's most important. We're so worried about getting the kids to the ball games or doing this at work or doing that at work that we don't take time to prepare for a Bible study on Sunday morning, that we don't take time to make the Lord a priority in the center of our life, that we're not reflecting on what we need to. We don't take the time to search out God, as we see in Psalms chapter 19. In verse 14, he says, "Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer." Flip over a few more passages to Psalms chapter 57. In verse 2 and 3, he says, "I will cry to my God, Most High, to God who accomplishes all things for me. He will send from heaven and save me. He reproaches him who tramples upon me. And he, God, will send forth his loving kindness and his truth." We have got to, if we're going to be the Christians that we say that we are, if we're going to be the Christians that we need to be, we're going to take time, I don't care if it's 1 day, 2 days, 3 days a week, whatever it takes that you need to be, to reflect and make sure that he is the center. It took Jonah getting swallowed by a fish for him to realize that, hey, I'm on the wrong path. Now, for you, it might be different. For me, it might be different than what Jonah's is. I might be so hard-headed that it might take me a month of needing to be in that fish's belly to realize that I need to reflect not on me, not what's important to me, but what God is. Who God is. You know, me and Drago have talked about it when me and John's talked about it. This has been a planting season for the record books. It has been. Normally, this time of year, I'm getting ready to go on vacation. I've still got 2,000 acres of corn side dress. I'm busy. I worked yesterday for until dinner time. I think we clocked in 80-something hours this week. That's part of it, but I mean, we're busy. Now, and Amelia, she came and visited me just for a little bit at work the other day, and I stayed, I think I had, 10 phone calls in a span of about 15 minutes, and I couldn't talk to her. And I said, hold on, let me get this one real quick. Hold on. I said, I'll call you when you get home. Right? I'm busy. I've got kids at home that need a daddy. I've got a wife at home that needs a husband. I've got a church that I'm trying to serve. I've got brethren that I'm trying to serve. I've got a boss that I'm trying to serve. We've all got that, right, to some degree. What's got to be the focus? Jesus Christ of Nazareth. All the rest of it can go, them crops are going to get planted with or without Caleb, with or without Drago. Things are going to happen. Somebody else will take a phone call, right? But I can only answer for myself when it comes to Judgment Day. Just myself. And if I've not made God the center of this whole thing called life, all that I've accomplished in life, no matter how much money I make, how many acres I've got, or whatever it is, it ain't going to amount to anything unless I've made God number one in my life. Because when I die, that's all that matters. When I die, my ground's going to go to somebody else. My bank account's going to go to somebody else. Caleb's just going to be there. His body's going to be there in a funeral home, ready to be put in the ground. But Caleb, who Caleb is, my soul is should be, hopefully, ready to meet God. And if I've made God the center, and if I've made sure that I've taken the time to reflect on Jesus and what He said and what God's done for me and the deliverance that He's done for me, just as Jonah had, then I'm going to be ready for whenever that comes. And so whether we need to take 2 days, 3 days, or whatever, God needs to be our center, because ultimately God will deliver us. Just as He delivered Jonah, God will deliver us. In Galatians chapter 1 and verse 4, He says, who gave Himself for our sins that He might rescue us from this present evil, according to the will of our God and Father. He will rescue us. Look over in the book of Jeremiah and the Old Testament. Jeremiah chapter 15 and verse 21. He says, so I will deliver you from the hand of the wicked, and I will redeem you from the grasp of the violent. I'll tell you, if there's anybody on planet Earth that needs rescuing, it's this old boy right here. I've done things that I regret. I've done things that are hurtful. I've said things that are hurtful. I've done things that I know that would condemn me to a sinner's hell. I need rescuing. I need it. Tracy, you need it. I don't know everything you've done, but I know you're human just like I am. You need it. Chris, you need it. We need Jesus, because without Him, we're done for. We're done for. We need rescuing. And whether it takes 1 day, 2 day, 3 day, whatever it takes to reflect and get ourselves back to center of saying, hey, the rest of it don't make no difference. I'm focusing my compass on Jesus Christ. If it takes you 3 days, take three days and make Him your center. Make Him the center of your universe, because ultimately that's all that matters. Well, what's another example in the Bible of 3 days? Well, I think about Jesus. Not full-grown Jesus, 12-year-old Jesus. In the book of Luke, chapter 2. Luke chapter 2 and verse 41. Luke writes there, he says, now his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover, and when he became 12, they went up there according to the custom of the feast, and as they were returning after spending the full number of days, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. But his parents were unaware of it, but supposed him to be in the caravan, and went a day's journey and began looking for him among the relatives and acquaintances. When they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem looking for him. Then after 3 days they found him in the temple, sitting in the midst of the teachers, both listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. And when they saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, Son, why have you treated us this way? Behold, your father and I have been anxiously looking for you. And he said to them, Why that you were looking for me? Did you not know that I'd be in my Father's house? But they did not understand the statement on which he had made to them. Now, Mary and Joseph lose track of a 12-year-old boy Jesus in Jerusalem. Now that would be terrifying. But think of it from the aspect of being Jesus. Now, Jesus was 100% God, but he's also 100% man at that time too, right? If you left 12-year-old Caleb in the downtown of Jerusalem, I'm ashamed to say you probably would not have found me in the temple. I'd probably been out trying to trade something in the market, or I'd been in trouble somehow, right? But when they look for him, it takes 3 days to find him. It ain't like you got Life 360. You can't pull him up on the phone and say, well, he's going down Main Street. Well, we'll catch up with you. You cut him off here, Joseph, I'll go and get him. That ain't the way it worked, right? 3 days. And they find him in the temple. Now, let's say you go missing. Based off your character and who you are, what you've said, how way you've acted, if your friends lose track of you, where would they find you? They going to find you studying? Are they going to find you with the center of where you need to be? With Jesus? Because ultimately, we need to be found in him. Paul writes in Philippians chapter 3 and verse 8. He says, More than that, I count all things to be lost in view of surpassing value of knowledge of Christ my Lord, for whom I have suffered all things of gain, suffered all loss of all things, and count them but rubbish, so that I may gain Christ. In verse 9, pay attention, and be found in him, not having a righteousness of my own derived from the law, but that which through faith in Christ, righteousness which comes from God on the basis of faith. Kids, there's lots of kids here, ain't there? If you got left in the middle of Bowling Green, where could Mom and Daddy find you? Like I said, I ain't perfect. I know. You probably would have found me at Cabela's or Texas Roadhouse. But if you are known by your characteristics, if you are known by your actions, of that when someone thinks about you, they think about Caleb, who are they going? What are they thinking about? Are they going to think about a carouser or somebody that's up to no good, that's constantly trying to do harm, or ultimately doesn't have God at the center of his life? Or are they going to say, well, I know he's not going to be here. I know he's not going to be there, so we don't even need to go look for him there. Because we know that those things in those places aren't associated with God. Where are they going to find you, Chris? That's a question we have to ask. Now, if we're going to be found in him, we need to be remembered by our actions. And our actions have to be indicators of who we are and what we are. And that goes back to love. Because if we are to be in him, what does it say in the book of 1 John? God is love, right? 1 John chapter 4 and verse 13. He says, by this we know and that we abide in him and he in us, because he has given us of his Spirit. We have seen and testified that the Father has sent the Son to be the Savior of the world. Whoever confesses that Jesus is the Son of God abides in him, and he is in God. We have come to know and have believed the love which God has for us. God is love. And the one who abides in him abides in love. God abides in him. You want to be in God? You want to be of God? You got to love. You got to demonstrate love, because love is an action. It is something that we do. If we look in the book of Matthew, chapter 25, Jesus speaks of this. In Matthew, the 25th chapter, in verse 34. Matthew chapter 25, in verse 34. He says, "And the king will say to those on his right, 'Come, you who are blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. Naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me.' Then the righteous will answer, 'Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did you see a stranger and invite you in, or naked and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and come to you?' And the king will answer and say to them, 'Truly I say to you, to the extent that you did to one of those brothers of mine, even to the least of them, you did it to me.'" If we're going to be found in Him, we got to act like Him. We've got to show love. We've got to show compassion. We've got to show hospitality. We've got to show loving kindness. Now, is that easy? Absolutely not. I know, you can ask Amelia, I'm not the easiest person to love sometimes. I know it. I'm not the easiest person to love. I can be bullheaded. I can be hard-headed. I can just be plumb unlovable sometimes. But Kevin knows that. But if I'm going to be found in Him, I have to change who I am. I have to set Him as the center of my universe. And whether, like we said, if it takes 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, or whatever, if you went missing, where are they going to find you? I hope it'd be preaching, teaching, and spreading the good news. Because if we are going to abide in Him, if we are going to be of Him, we are going to be representative of Him and what He does. And that's what Jesus is. Jesus served. Jesus loved. Jesus taught. And it goes to show, too, that it don't matter whether you're 35 years old like I am or whether you're 12 years old like Jesus was. You can have an impact. That at 12 years old, they were astonished at what He knew, His knowledge of the Scriptures. And at 12 years old, He had an impact on those that were older than those around Him. Young people that's here, you have an impact on me. When you're paying attention and participating in worship service and studying and coming to class and Sunday school, ready to be able to discuss what we're talking about, that encourages me. When you don't, it discourages me. It has an impact on the entire congregation. But if you're going to be like Jesus, that at 12 years old is found in the temple teaching and studying the Word of God, that's what you're going to be doing. You're going to be imitating Him. Be imitators of Christ. It's what Paul tells us to do. Also think about Saul. Turn, if you will, to Acts chapter 9. Now Saul, if we think about Saul, in Acts chapter 7, we had seen Saul had overwhelmingly approved of the death of Stephen being stoned. And because of that, we see in Acts chapter 8 and verse 1, it says Saul was in hearty agreement with putting him to death. And we get over to verse 9, right after we learn of the conversion of Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch. In Acts chapter 9, we see Saul. And Luke writes there, he says, "Now Saul, still breathing threats of murder against the disciples of the Lord, went to the high priest and asked for letters from him to the synagogues at Damascus, that if he found any belonging to the way, the church, both men and women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem." Now he's got it out for the Christians. He thinks he's so right in what he does that he's trying to put every one of them that is of the way in jail. He's already killed one of them that we know of. He's had enough of it. And so he's going from Jerusalem to Damascus and taking who he can get. Now, when we think about that, from Jerusalem to Damascus is about 150 miles. So you're not just willy-nilly going to go and walk 150 miles. He is going for a purpose. I ain't walking to Louisville without a purpose. Right? I ain't driving to Louisville without a purpose so I can keep from it. He's got a purpose. And it's to arrest these people. Verse 3, it says, and as he was traveling, it happened that he was approaching Damascus, and suddenly a great light from heaven flashed down on him, and he fell to the ground, and he heard a voice saying to him, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And he said, who are you, Lord? And he said, I'm Jesus whom you are persecuting. But get up and enter the city, and it will be told what you must do. The men who traveled with him stood speechless, hearing the voice but not seeing anyone. Saul got up from the ground, and through his eyes open he could see nothing, and led him by the hand. They brought him to Damascus, and he was 3 days without sight, and neither ate nor drank. 3 days. 3 days he has to think about what Jesus told him. And he said, when he calls him out by name, Saul, why are you doing this to me? 3 days. And we talked this about in our Sunday school class this morning. The average human body can only last 3 days without water. 3 days. It says here he went 3 days without food or drink. Now, you can go 3 days without food. You can't go more than 3 days without water. He is in a weakened state. He is in a humbled state. He had went from having direct orders from headquarters to go and, arrest anybody they could arrest to having been led around by his hand because he can't figure out how to get out of the door. That's going to humble a man pretty quick. And in these 3 days, no doubt Saul has time to reflect about all the things he's done. He can imagine in his mind, even though we can't see, he can remember the sights of seeing Stephen crying out and dying, being stoned. Watching a man die for what he's convicted for. Watching a man die for what he believes in. But on day 3, Ananias comes to him. If we flip over to Acts chapter 22, we see Paul retelling this tale to the Jews. In Acts chapter 22, in verse 13, actually we'll start in verse 12. It says, a certain man who is devout, Ananias, by the standard of the law, and well spoken by all the Jews who lived there, came to me, and standing near to me said, Brother Saul, receive your sight. And at that very time I looked up at him. And he said, the God of our fathers has appointed you to know his will, and see the righteous one, and to hear the utterance of his mouth. For you will be a witness to him, for him, to all the men who have seen and heard. Why do you delay? Get up, be baptized, wash away your sins, calling on his name. Now he went from being sin as an old man to being blind, and because of Ananias laying his hands on him and the power of God, this man, after doing what he says of being baptized and coming up a new man, he not only can he see with his eyes again, now he's got new sight. He's living a new life. Because if we look back at the account and that we see in Acts chapter 9, we were talking about this morning too. If you look back right after that, in verse 18, verse 19, it says, now for several days he was with the disciples at Damascus, and he immediately began to proclaim Jesus in the synagogue, saying, he is the Son of God. Now that's a stark difference from a man that had just been throwing people in jail for it 3 days before. Immediately, he had new sight. What about you? Do you have that attitude? Have you ever reflected on your life and said, I realize that what I'm doing is not in accordance with what God's will is. Now, whether you took 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, or whatever it is to figure that out, everybody is different. But I had a real hard realization of that, as I told y'all about 1.5 years ago. My sight was not what it should have been. Oh, I was doing good at work. I was successful. I'd won all them Farm Bureau awards and everything. You know, I was doing good, had a new tractor to boot. But my vision was not what it should have been. I was pointed in all the wrong directions, and doing good as a person in society would say, well, hey, Caleb's doing all right. But my vision was not clear for what it should have been. My vision was not clear of my priority being getting to heaven. Now, everybody has a different walk of life. I realize that. My walk is different than Keith's. My walk's different than Chris's, Kevin's, John's, whoever's. We all have different things that we face. We've all got different things that we struggle with. We've all got different things that happen to us. Nobody is going to have the exact same experience on this earth. It just doesn't happen like that. We might have similar, but it's not going to be the exact same. But if we all have the realization that I can't make it to heaven without Him, that changes the game. It changes, because if you're going to make it to heaven, you've got to have Him as your sight. You know, I wear contacts, and I'm about as blind as a bat without them. And this is no kidding. If I take my contacts out, Brett, you're an eye doctor, said it'd be good. You'd have to lead me out of this. I'm that bad. And I'm sure you've seen people worse than that, but I mean, I'm that bad. I can make out colors, but that's about it. But when I put in them contacts, I can see. My vision is restored. I can see the direction that I need to go. If you're not reflecting on your life and renewing your focus with God, you need to think about Saul, because that's exactly what Saul did. In 1 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 15, he said, this is a trustworthy statement deserving full acceptance, that Jesus Christ came into the world to save sinners, among whom I am foremost of all. Paul considered him the worst of the worst, and if he can be given new sight by Jesus Christ, then I can. If I can be given new light by Jesus Christ, you can. And whether it takes 1 day, 3 days, whatever it is, you need to make yourself right today. Oh, we talked about this last week. Jesus could come back before this sermon is over. And if you're not ready to go to heaven, you've missed it all. I mean, that's just facts of the matter. I'm not the judge. God's the judge. But we have written out in our scriptures in the Bible as to what He's going to judge us by. And if your sight isn't set on Him, whether you need to take 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, whatever, to make that realization, I encourage you and implore you to look at your life. Because today could be it. I remember I had a really good friend when I was in high school that went to church on Sunday morning, had not been saved, and that afternoon got killed in a car wreck. You talk about a sad funeral. I hope that don't happen to any of us today, but the reality of it is, I pull out of here, that could happen to me. You know how many times I've been hit by the hip pulling out of here? A couple of times. Last week, matter of fact, was one of them. It could be any of us. But we have to be ready. Ready for Him and ready for death. But we just got to make sure that our sights are set on Him. Because of that, we have that hope because Jesus is risen from the dead. And you know, Jesus died and was in the tomb for 3 days. And when Jesus dies, it all seems lost. If you're looking at it from the outside in, hey, their Savior's been killed. Romans done put Him to death. Not only did they put Him to death, they put Him to death in the most cruel way that you could do it, crucifixion. It would have been a blessing to have His head cut off. He gets put in a criminal's death. But we know that Jesus overpowered death and conquered death for us on our behalf. 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verse 4. It says that he was buried and that he was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures. Flip over with me to Matthew chapter 27. Matthew chapter 27 and verse 3. Now this is talking about Judas. We see in verse 1 and 2, Jesus is bound up and is delivered over to Pilate. And we see Judas here. It says, then Judas, who had betrayed him, saw that he had been condemned, and he felt remorse, and returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priest and elders, saying, I have sinned by betraying innocent blood. And they said, what's it to us? See to that yourself. And he threw the pieces of silver into the temple sanctuary and departed, and he went away and hung himself. Now, sin is sin. Whether I lie about something or whether I go and kill somebody, in God's eyes, it is sin. Now, different sins has different consequences. We acknowledge that. But sin is sin. Sin is separation from God. We see just prior to this, in Matthew chapter 26, that Peter had denied Christ. I don't know who he is. Matter of fact, he cursed when he said it too. I don't know who he is. That was a sin. He denied Christ. Was it a sin that Judas had went and betrayed Jesus? You better believe it. But a sin's a sin. Now we know, for reading further in the Scriptures, that Peter comes and asks for forgiveness from Jesus. Remember that? And he does that. But I think about Judas. What if Judas had waited 3 days? Now, had he done wrong by betraying him? You better believe it. But if he had waited 3 days, he'd have seen he overcome death. He overcome death. Who does that? Well, the Son of God. But Judas takes things in his hand and ends it himself. 3 days. 3 days and it could have been a different outcome for Judas. We've got to have faith that he is who he says he is. He overcame for us. And we can, and you know, he overcame everything for us. In Hebrews chapter 2, we're almost finished. Hebrews chapter 2 and verse 9. Hebrews chapter 2 and verse 9, the Hebrew writer there says, but we do see him who is made for a little while lower than the angels, namely Jesus, because of the suffering of death, crowned with glory and honor, so that by the grace of God he might taste death for everyone. He did that for us, and he overcame death for us in 3 days, was rose up, and today reigns in heaven. And because of that, we can overcome through him too. 1 John chapter 5 and verse 5. He says, who is the one who overcomes the world? But he who believes that he is Jesus, is the Son of God. You want to overcome, you got to put faith in him. And the thing is, we can overcome death, we can overcome spiritual death, but you know what? We ain't got to wait 3 days. You can make that happen today. You can overcome sin today. You can be like Saul was in Acts chapter 22, where when Ananias came to him, he said, why do you delay? Why are you waiting? That's what he said to him. Why do you delay? Get up, be baptized, and wash away your sins, calling upon his name. You ain't got to wait. You can leave here this morning ready for Jesus to come back. You ain't got to wait 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. We can do it right now. That's like when I baptized Cora back the first of the year, she came up to me before Sunday school started and she said, I want to I realize I'm not in the condition I need to be. I need to be baptized. I said, well, hey, let's do it right now. Remember that? We did 4 services. Well, no time to wait. Got examples in the New Testament that waiting ain't the thing. Acts chapter 8, Ethiopian eunuch, he said, here's water. What prevents me from being baptized? Hey, there's a whole lot cleaner water than the side of the road on going home to Ethiopia, I promise you. Why wait? Do it now. Because you ain't got to wait 2 or 3 days. You can do it now. Because of Jesus, who in 3 days rose from the dead. Who in 3 days overcame death for us. And went from suffering on a cross with a crown of thorns to reigning in heaven with a crown set for a king. Our king. My king. Your king. Maybe you're here this morning and you needed to act upon what he said there in Acts chapter 2 and verse 6. And we said, why do you delay? Get up. Because there is only one way to make it to heaven, and that is through Jesus Christ, the Son of God of Nazareth. And that's why Peter wrote to us in 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 21. He says, he tells us exactly how to do that. He says, corresponding to that, baptism now saves you. Not the removal of dirt from flesh. It ain't getting wet. But it's an appeal to God for good conscience through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Because He died for us and overcome in 3 days that we might live through Him. Maybe you're here this morning and you haven't done that. I implore you, I urge you, don't wait a minute longer. Don't wait 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year. Let's make it right today. I want every single one of us ready to leave here this morning, ready for God to come back. Maybe you've done that in the past, but you ain't been living like you ought to. Whether you need to take care of that in a public manner or private manner, I'll pray with you, for you, whatever the case might be. But let's all leave here this morning ready for Jesus to come back. If there's any need for salvation this morning, come forward as we stand and sing the song Matthew selected.